How's it going, folks? Stu here. I was lucky enough to watch Edgar Wright's new one last night in Soho, this morning in Soho. Felt good to say it. I've been waiting all day for that one. I'm going to be absolutely riding the wave of that intro for days to come. Last Night in Soho, as I said, it's directed and written by Edgar Wright. You might have heard of him. He's done a couple of belters. And Last Night in Soho is more of a journey into the horror genre for Edgar Wright, which I was incredibly excited to see. It's set in, you bloody guessed it, Soho. Who saw that one coming? And without giving too much away, it's basically about a student played by Thomasin McKenzie who comes to London to study fashion and ends up finding herself wrapped up in a mystery from the past, shall we say. Haunted by dreams of another girl in the city from the 60s, played by Anya Taylor-Joy. And this film was just an absolute hoot from beginning to end. There's a certain energy and rhythm that we've come to expect from Wright as a filmmaker, and that's absolutely still present here in Last Night in Soho, if not more present than ever. And I really loved his diving into the genre moments in here and the sort of mystery at the front of this film. It's very clearly a love letter to London and Soho, a city which Wright spends obviously a lot of time in, and that can sometimes feel like a little bit of a frustrating and cliche aspect of certain films. If that's all it's going for, it can get a little bit repetitive, just being like, oh, I know that place, and that's a place that exists, it's a love letter. But this film does it really well, I think. It does genuinely have a lot of purpose in that sense. And it was just, yeah, it was fun seeing Wright go through the 60s and modern day London. It all weaves into this really interesting idea of time and memories and the past and the present, which all weave really well into the horror aspects of the film, which are really, really fun. I'd say that it's not really scary. I mean, there are scares in there, but they're not like, oh shit, I'm gonna lose sleep for days kind of horror scares. They're more kind of creative, fun scares, which I always really enjoy in horror films. I find that to be much more engaging than typical cliche horror moments. And there's some really awesome stuff in here, littered along the way, in the dreamlike sequences, in the clubs, using color, and obviously Wright's flair for visual storytelling. They all work really, really well and just always engaging. But I think it helps that we're led through the mystery here with someone like Thomasin McKenzie, who absolutely crushes it. I mean, I love her as an actress. She consistently delivers in all the roles she gives, and she does a good job of bringing new things to different roles. She's a very versatile young actress. She's absolutely got an insane career ahead of her, but she works so well with that kind of deer in the headlights sort of feeling throughout this entire thing. It makes it much more interesting to watch her try and unravel the mysteries. But she's often paired in the film with Anya Taylor-Joy, who's again really, really great. Love her as well. Matt Smith's in there, brilliant as well. Diana Riggs in there, unfortunately no longer with us. This was, I think, her last performance. And actually, she did give a surprisingly really memorable performance. So yeah, the whole cast is doing great work. But as I said, Thomasin McKenzie as our lead is definitely the highlight of the film in a performance aspect. But I just enjoyed going along with the mystery of this one and trying to piece it together and unravel it. I think from the promotional materials, I was a little bit worried that it might end up feeling kind of one note, like the same kind of effect, I guess you could say, if you've seen any of the trailers over and over. And thankfully, it doesn't really feel like that. I think the dreamlike sequences in there really work to build on the mystery and just sort of throw Thomasin McKenzie through it all. And typically, as we've come to expect from Edgar Wright, it's a film with a brilliant soundtrack made up of loads of 60s tunes that don't just feel like fun 60s needle drops. They do feel like they have a purpose in the environment, in the world of the film that he's created. And again, similar to all of his previous work, the soundtrack and the music has such an integral part in the way the story unfolds for us and the way it all works in tandem with each other. There's the rhythm really pushing it forward, not quite in as much an overt way as something like Baby Driver, where, you know, things are literally timed to the rhythm of the music and it's such a huge part of that film. But in a different way here, the music plays such a good part in escalating the madness and the horror of what ends up actually going on in Soho last night. It's also really funny. There's some genuinely good belly laughs in there. I will say I'm interested to see how different audiences react around the world. It does feel like a very London film. I guess, unsurprisingly, it's literally called Last Night in Soho. But there are definitely a load of just sort of nods and jokes that Londoners are going to appreciate, I think, more than other people. That might come off as lazy to some. I do think there are certainly points where it did feel a little bit like they might have just been going through the script, just like, we need a joke here. Just whacking a joke about London or something and people all enjoy it. There's about 3 jokes about North and South London being way further apart than they actually are, which is true, and I enjoyed those jokes. But on the whole, the comedy really did work for me, which is not a surprise. I've always enjoyed the comedy in Edgar Wright's films. And again, it all adds up into a really fun, hugely entertaining kind of horror, thriller, comedy hybrid in a way which only someone like Edgar Wright can really pull off in his own way. I will say, however, though, I'm not sure it really landed the ending in a way which I found to be hugely satisfying. It's not that I thought it was a bad ending per se, just that, and I think it's the way the mystery unfolds gets in the way of itself, if that makes much sense. If it looks like I'm squirming around the specifics here, it's because I'm really trying not to spoil it for anyone, but I think it sort of runs into the problems that you get with a lot of mysteries like this, where you spend so long wondering what the actual thing that's happened is that you can't help but go down different lanes and make up your mind on where you think it's going to go, and a film will either take the easy route or do something left field or whatever. But if it doesn't feel like it's spent enough time on the climax versus all of the build-up, to me, I find that can sometimes feel quite unsatisfying. And unfortunately, I did kind of have that with Last Night in Soho. I would have loved an extra 20 minutes or so, just so that there's space to really land some of the plot points that end up happening. It's sort of like there's a switch where it's like, wrap up. And I think some of that also comes down to kind of one of the strengths of Edgar Wright's filmmaking and writing, which is a weird thing to say. But I really love the way he plots his films so that there's always sort of payoffs to things that happen earlier in the film. It means that everything feels intentional, and when you look back at films that he makes, this one is no doubt going to be the same. When you rewatch them, you get lots of little nuggets that you didn't quite pick up before. I love that side of his filmmaking. But I think in the context of the mystery that's in this film, that does sometimes feel like things are quite overtly plotted. And I think that in itself can get in the way of certain payoffs. Again, try not to spoil things. Sorry if this is sounding vague. All that to say, I had a hugely fun time with this. I thought it was a great time. Not my favorite of Wright's films by any stretch, but I will say it does have some of my favorite Edgar Wright sequences in it. Like, some of the best moments from his entire filmography are in this film. It's just that the film that they're in overall didn't completely blow me away. But I did have a fucking hoot of a time, and I really can't wait to rewatch it. It's definitely one to watch on the big screen if you can get out there and do it and feel safe. But what about you guys? Have you seen Last Night in Soho? Did you catch it at the film festival, or are you excited to see it when it does release later on in the month here? Let me know what you thought about it in the comments down below. We'll have a little chat, and while you're down there, why don't you subscribe? I'm all out of reasons, but it'd be nice if you did it. I'll see you very soon for more thoughts and more films from the festival, but until next time, I'm going to go and savor that intro again. I'm still not over it. It was too good. It lined up. Saw Last Night in Soho this morning in Soho. It writes itself. It's just poetry.